Hello there, and welcome to Have We Thought This Through? This episode is all about mental models and metaphors, and it's my Christmas special. So, what are these two things, and what's the difference between them? Both of them are incredibly useful ways that we use our minds. We use our mental models to create kind of abstractions and systematized or schematic views of the world, of particular phenomenon or phenomena. And we might, for example, I often do, create a diagram of a particular system or set of ideas that we're working on, and we create a kind of set of relationships between elements and components in the system. It's all highly abstract, but the beautiful thing about that abstraction is that it's kind of like a translating layer. It's like taking the world, trying to understand it with our minds, and then mapping that into a mental model. And if we do it, for example, diagrammatically, then I'm able to share that model with others who can then critique it and help me improve it. Mathematicians and scientists often use maths as a way to model things, which can then be used and tested to see how they compare with the world, and as a way to understand and forecast activities and events within the world. So mental models, incredibly useful. Metaphors, in my mind, are very similar in some respects. So they're about the way of using one thing to describe another, but they're kind of fundamentally linguistic, fluid, poetic, expressive. They're rooted in our culture. And interestingly, I think if we look at metaphor, we realize that technology and the role that technology plays in our lives has this enormous distorting effect on our use of metaphor. So, for example, just a recent obvious one, the idea of cloud computing is so much more straightforward, magical to describe than the idea of suggesting to your organization that you want all of your software to be on somebody else's computers somewhere else in the world, potentially a server farm in the middle of the desert. And it evokes a kind of sense of beauty and lightness of being that worked incredibly well as a metaphor when CTOs were making that transition into the world of cloud computing. It also obviously worked brilliantly as part of the sales process. But it was a metaphor, a technology nature metaphor that was very powerful. Another one, absolutely dripping with the culture over maybe the last 30, 40 years, is the idea of brain as computer. And oh my goodness, we've got this every which way going on. And I feel it tangibly at the moment as well with the generative AI wave that we're in. But brain as a computer often functioned when we think about components of the brain mirroring components in our computers, in our CPUs. We would start to think about human memory as somehow analogous to computer memory. We start to think about the ways in which we read, write memories or data to computers as similar to memories in a human mind. And so we can see that these metaphors have this incredible cultural power. Technology evokes metaphor continuously. Another much longer lasting one is body as machine. And pretty much emerged, I think, as soon as machines emerged, but really took hold in the Industrial Revolution. There was a strong sense that we understood ourselves as mechanized beings, and that we broke down in the way that machines broke down, and we could be efficient in the way that machines were efficient. and we could do work like machines do work. And so all of a sudden, we took our very selves and converted us into technology metaphors. And interestingly, as part of that moment of metaphoric rise, there was the idea of the homunculus, the tiny human-like creature driving the human machine up in the brain, controlling the levers, working the machine, being an operator. This idea of a metaphor of a being in control of another metaphoric idea, the human as machine. This is a fairly profound metaphor on metaphor concept that amused people, but also felt like a kind of an interesting answer to the question of who are we, where are ourselves located, and doing that all within the context of a complicated technology era. With mental models, one of the things that I wanted to just get into was, there's a few different ones I want to talk about, but like one that really touched me, and I know will have touched many of you as well, is in the beginning of Mindstorms by Seymour Papert. He talks about discovering this car gears, I think, in his garage. At the time, he was struggling with understanding multiplication, but he started to play with these gears, and they helped him to sort of understand what was going on with multiplication through the ratios of these gears. And it's really interesting when you start to think about what those mental models are doing there. He found this kind of physical representation of multiplication, and he explored it and he understood it. But what he was doing, of course, was transferring that model into his mind. And he was doing it through a form of embodied learning. As he played with the gears, he could start to see things happening, but then he could start to understand the concepts behind those things, and this idea of the interrelationships between these cogs being multipliers. And this had a profound effect on his ability to understand this particular part of maths. Another super intriguing one is the relationship between GPS as a mental model around mapping, paper maps as a way of creating a mental model for location space, and our interior mental models for understanding where we are. So if we just think about these things for a minute, when we're using a GPS, we're often, in a way, absolving ourselves of building a mental model. We simply don't need to. If I'm going to drive from here, Norfolk, to Edinburgh, I don't build a mental model of the whole of the country in between. I get out Google Maps, and it just literally tells me second to second what to do, and I just behave like a good, obedient human. When I'm working with a map, a physical map, and I'm driving a car, that is simply not possible. I would crash the car. It's probably illegal. But what I do is I refer to that map and I transfer an amount of that information into my mind as mental model. I absorb an amount of its information. Somebody else made that map. They understood that space, and then I was able to transfer it into my mind. But if I fundamentally know the way to Edinburgh, and not only that, what if there was a traffic jam on the way and I had to pick a new way because of that? I would have an internal mental model for being able to do that. So these are three different ways in which the idea of mapping reveals itself as mental model. And this tells us something about where humans want to find themselves in the mix. With GPS, we find it incredibly convenient, and we are using our Google Maps as our first port of call. But we sort of are semi-conscious of the fact that we are trading off the ability to have built our own mental models around this. So just as a parting thought, and my happy Christmas to you, I've been pondering what the Labour Party has been doing since and just before the election, and wondering to what extent metaphor versus mental model is at play. So bear with me. I think that we may have all misunderstood, yes. Before the election, the Labour Party, they made some pledges, and then as the election unfolded, they turned into missions, and there were steps, and then there are milestones. If we weren't looking at this super closely, we might think, hold on a minute, are they just changing the metaphors continuously? Is it just the same thing? It's a direction of travel. It's a place that we want to be. And for whatever reason, every couple of months, they decide, or weeks, that they need a new word, a new metaphor to keep us excited or confused. Or, in fact, have they had a mental model the whole while and been revealing it to us bit by bit, right, to keep us on the hoof? So maybe pledges, if we think of a diagram, pledges are a kind of promise of direction that one makes but is unable to activate. So imagine them at the bottom of the diagram. And then we start to see a sequence of steps that emerge from that. They're our first steps, right? Our first steps are towards a mission. So the mission's up at the top of the diagram, okay? They're where we're heading. That's the super exciting place in the future. And maybe the milestones are a sequence of important steps all the way through this next 5 years of government. So maybe what's happening here is that my confusion about this change program has been that I've misunderstood something as metaphor when really it was diagrammatic, schematic, mental model. Anyway, have a happy Christmas and New Year, and I'll see you for the next one, hopefully. Bye.